She was adored, crowned, protected by his love, and yet she was buried beside others who broke his heart. King Henry VIII extinguished the lives of nearly everyone closest to him: queens, friends, ministers. Why? Because each one dared to reflect a vulnerability he could not bear. He was the king who crushed personal bonds as swiftly as he seized crowns. Before we plunge deeper, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always amazed at where these stories are being heard. Henry was born into power in 1491, heir to a kingdom recently torn by civil war. He was a prince groomed for glory, athletic, educated, and fed stories of chivalric kings. He believed he was destined to reign as a warrior king, an echo of Henry V, his heroic namesake. But the crown is both golden and burdened. In 1509, Henry married Catherine of Aragon, the devout and shrewd Spanish princess. They were young, popular, and for years happy, until Catherine failed to produce a male heir. One daughter, Mary, survived, but that was not enough for Henry's ambition. His desperation turned to obsession. The lack of a son was not just a dynastic inconvenience, it was a crack in his divine right. Enter Anne Boleyn, with her foreign education, fiery spirit, and irresistible wit. She refused to be his mistress. She demanded he make her queen. Thus began the king's great matter. Henry defied the Pope, married Anne in secret, and broke from Rome, creating the Church of England with himself as supreme head. By mid-1533, Anne was crowned queen, the nation celebrated, the Pope seethed, and Henry believed he was rewriting history. But within months, himself and Anne understood that politics is not permanent, power is perilous. Anne gave him a daughter, Elizabeth. He wanted a son. Repeated miscarriages followed, nobles whispered, allies drifted, and one man, Thomas Cromwell, rose to power. First Anne's protector in church reform, then Henry's enforcer. Even Cromwell, whom Henry had entrusted as vicar general to dissolve monasteries and seize church wealth, found himself on thin ice when political winds shifted. He was the architect of the Anne downfall, yet less than 7 years later, he engineered a marriage to Anne of Cleves that Henry despised. Henry, humiliated, blamed Cromwell, scrubbing any fond mention of him when he had him executed in 1540 on the same day he wed Catherine Howard. Every bonded tie was transactional. If a friend or wife mirrored Henry's failure, they became sacrifice. Henry's marriage to Catherine Howard, a teenager when he was 49, began in extravagance, but soon stories swirled of youth, passion and betrayal. Catherine's indiscretions with Thomas Culpeper and Francis Deramay became the final proof the king needed. She was executed in 1542, and with her the last trace of his old love but not his circle of advisors. Lady Rochford, caught facilitating Catherine's affair, was also beheaded. So many lives orbited Henry, wives, confidantes, diplomats, and yet all fell to suspicion, ambition and fear. By mid-1540s, physical pain and paranoia consumed him. His legs ached, his face swelled, and his trust evaporated. He even executed his former teacher, Thomas More, who had opposed the break with Rome, and later Thomas Cromwell, his closest minister. Towers of blood grew thicker around him. In just over 3 decades, Henry had destroyed 5 wives, best friends, greatest ministers, and still he wore the crown. More alone, more wounded, more terrifying than ever. In just under 4 decades, Henry VIII married 6 times, but only one queen would receive a proper royal burial. Each wife, whether divorced, beheaded or widowed, reflected back to him something he could not bear: failure, defiance, or his own crumbling ideals. What he once loved, he eventually feared, and what he feared, he destroyed. The first to fall was Catherine of Aragon, his wife of 24 years. She had been the devoted Spanish queen, proud and unshakable, who gave him a daughter but not the son he craved. Henry's obsession with a male heir turned their once stable union into a war of attrition. When the Pope refused to grant an annulment, Henry broke away from Rome and declared their marriage invalid. Catherine, humiliated and stripped of her title, spent her final years in isolation. She never saw her daughter Mary again. In 1536, she died, unloved, cast aside, but still a queen in the eyes of many. Anne Boleyn followed, the woman for whom Henry tore down a church. She gave him Elizabeth, but failed to give him a son. Their passion unraveled into cold distance and political anxiety. By 1536, rumors of affairs filled the court. Anne was arrested, charged with adultery, incest, and treason, accusations that historians widely agree were fabricated. She was executed within days, her head severed by a French swordsman. The queen who had once captivated a king now lay in an unmarked grave, her name spoken in whispers. Jane Seymour seemed to offer Henry peace. She was gentle, quiet, and gave him the son he had longed for, Edward VI, but she would never live to see her child grow. Jane died from postnatal complications just 12 days after childbirth. Henry grieved her deeply. He had her buried with honor, and when his own death approached, he requested to be laid beside her. And yet even in death, Jane's love offered no reprieve from the wreckage Henry had wrought. In 1540, he married Anne of Cleves, a political union negotiated by his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell. But the marriage embarrassed him. He claimed she looked nothing like her portrait. The union was annulled after 6 months, and Cromwell, once Henry's most trusted advisor, was executed shortly after. That same day, Henry married Catherine Howard. Catherine was young, vibrant, and recklessly naive. Barely 19, she became queen to a man in his late 40s, obese and plagued by infections. Their relationship, at first passionate, spiraled into scandal. When evidence surfaced that Catherine had secretly continued affairs after their wedding, most notably with Thomas Culpeper, Henry erupted. She was arrested, tried, and beheaded in 1542. Alongside her died Jane Boleyn, the widowed sister-in-law of Anne, who had helped facilitate the affair. It was not just Queen's Henry buried, but anyone caught in the orbit of his fury. Beyond his wives, Henry's wrath extended to his closest friends and advisors. Sir Thomas More, once a cherished confidant, refused to accept the king's supremacy over the church. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London, tried for treason, and beheaded in 1535. More's execution sent a clear message: conscience was no match for loyalty to the king. And Thomas Cromwell, the very man who had delivered Henry his divorce, dismantled the monasteries, and built the Church of England's new framework, was later discarded like all the rest. His downfall was swift, tied to Henry's embarrassment over Anne of Cleves. In 1540, he too lost his head, executed by the same regime he had constructed. What united them all was not crime, but closeness. To be near Henry was to walk a tightrope above a sword. His love was conditional, his friendship lethal. As his reign deepened, so did his suspicion. What began as ambition morphed into tyranny. Those who had once shaped England alongside him were erased from portraits, silenced in text, buried under the stones of forgotten loyalty. By 1547, Henry VIII was bloated with illness, consumed by paranoia, and haunted by ghosts of the very people he once claimed to love. His legs ulcerated, his heart failing, he died surrounded by servants, not companions. He left behind 3 children from 3 different women, and a kingdom both more powerful and more fractured than ever. In death, he was placed beside Jane Seymour, the only wife who gave him a son, and the only one who never lived long enough to disappoint him. Henry VIII had broken the Catholic Church, changed the monarchy, and reshaped the identity of England. But in doing so, he had destroyed nearly everyone who mattered to him. Lovers, queens, allies, mentors, none were spared. Power was his crown, but fear was his legacy. He ruled with might. He died alone,